On January 4th, a word is stirring, quiet, ancient, and yet urgent for this very hour. It comes not with thunder, but with a whisper woven through Scripture, history, and the hidden places of the home. God has always used simple things to reveal eternal truths: a staff, a stone, a jar of oil. And today He draws our attention to something just as small, just as overlooked: salt, not by accident, not without purpose. For what seems ordinary in the natural often carries authority in the spiritual. From the covenants of old to the words of the prophets, salt was never just seasoning. It was a sign of preservation, of purity, of standing watch against decay. And now the question confronts us: where does God say it must be kept? Why that place? And what happens when what He ordained is ignored or restored? This is not about superstition. This is about alignment. Because when God speaks of the house, He is never only speaking of walls and rooms. He is speaking of covering, order, and destiny. Listen closely, for this instruction may be the key to protecting what heaven has entrusted to you. From the beginning, God has hidden the deepest mysteries inside the simplest acts. He places eternity inside the ordinary and calls His people to discern what others overlook. Salt is one of those mysteries. It appears quietly in the Scriptures, yet it stands at the center of covenant, preservation, and divine witness. In the ancient world, salt was not optional, it was essential. Without it, corruption followed, decay advanced. What was meant to last could not endure. And so God bound LT to His covenants, commanding that offerings should never be without it, declaring it a covenant of salt, a phrase that speaks not of flavor, but of permanence, loyalty, and protection. When God speaks of the house, He is never merely speaking of shelter. A house in Scripture represents authority, lineage, spiritual jurisdiction, and the gate between what enters and what is kept out. What is laced within a house carries meaning. What is removed from it also carries consequence. Salt, when present, stands as a silent witness. It does not shout, it does not move, yet it resists corruption, simply by being where it has been assigned. This is why God does not randomly instruct His people. He is precise. He does not say to keep salt anywhere, but in a specific place, because placement deters. Minds function, and function releases power. In the days of the prophets, cities were healed with salt, waters were purified with salt, and covenants were sealed with salt. It was a marker that said, this territory belongs to order, not chaos. When salt was applied, what was poison could become life-giving again. When salt was present, what would rot was restrained. And when God speaks now, He is drawing attention not to the salt itself, but to the obedience that positions it. Because obedience is what turns the natural into the prophetic. There is a reason the enemy always targets the foundations of a house. He aims not first at destruction, but at slow erosion. He introduces compromise, neglect, forgetfulness. He convinces people that ancient instructions no longer matter, that symbol are meaningless, that small acts carry no weight. But heaven operates differently. Heaven moves through alignment, and when alignment is broken, protection weakens. This is why God calls His people back to remembrance. Remember what was done before. Remember what was placed where it was meant to be placed. Remember that your house is not neutral ground. Salt does not attack. It preserves. It maintains boundaries. It absorbs what should not spread. And spiritually, it represents a standing guard. When God says to always keep it in this place of the house, He is establishing a continual testimony. Always means unbroken. Always means not seasonal. Always means not only when there is trouble, because God's ways are preventative, not reactive. He does not wait for decay to be visible. He blocks it before it takes root. Throughout Scripture, when people honored God in their homes, peace followed. When the home was neglected spiritually, disorder entered quietly. The house becomes a gate, and every gate must be guarded. Salt in this instruction becomes a sign that the gate has not been abandoned. It declares that the house remembers who it belongs to, that it stands under covenant. At it resists what seeks to enter unnoticed. This is not about ritual without heart. God never honors empty motions. This is about obedience flowing from faith. The act is small, but the declaration is vast. It says, my house is set apart. It says, this dwelling answers to heaven. It says, decay has no permission here. And when God's order is restored, confusion loses ground. When his instru, Cahn, is honored, alignment returns. Many wonder why unrest lingers, why heaviness settles, why peace feels interrupted. Often the answer is not found in dramatic gestures, but in forgotten instructions. God restores by calling his people back to what was once understood, back to the patterns that held generations together, back to the quiet acts that carried spiritual authority. Salt is one of those acts. Not because of what it is, but because of what God has attached to it. When this instruction is obeyed, the house begins to speak without words. It testifies in the spiritual realm. It establishes a boundary line. And just as in ancient times where salt marked what was preserved for the king, so too this act marks the house as watched over, claimed, and kept. And as long as it remains here God has spoken, it stands as a reminder that what he establishes, he sustains, that what he covers, he protects, and that what he calls to endure will not be surrendered to decay, even when unseen pressures rise and silence fills the rooms and time moves forward, carrying both promise and testing without pause. God has always been a God of place. From the garden planted in the east to the tabernacle positioned at the center of the camp, to the temple built on the mountain he chose, heaven pays attention to where things are set. Placement is never accidental in the kingdom. What is placed wrongly loses its power, and what is placed rightly releases authority. This is why God does not only speak of what must be kept, but where it must be kept, because the place becomes the message in ever. Why house? There is a point of intersection, a location that represents access, movement, and transition. It is where coming and going is decided, where what is outside seeks entry, and what is inside is exposed to the world beyond. Scripture reveals again and again that gates matter. Cities fell when gates were compromised. Families were protected when doors were marked. Authority either stands or elapses at points of entry. When God speaks of a specific place in the house, he is speaking of a spiritual gateway, a threshold where influence is either allowed or resisted. Salt placed in that appointed place does not function as an object, but as a witness. It stands silently and declares that this threshold is not common ground, that what crosses here must submit to divine order. In the ancient world, salt was used at city gates, in covenant ceremonies, and in moments where permanence was declared. To place salt at a designated place in the house is to echo that ancient language, to say without words that this dwelling is under watch, that its boundaries are recognized in the spiritual realm. God's instructions are never random, and they are never symbolic without substance. When he specifies a place, he is anchoring his command to spiritual geography. Just as he told Israel where to stand, where to march, where to camp, and where to build, he now draws attention to a location within the home that carries responsibility. The enemy understands this principle well. He does not first attack the heart of a house, but its access points. He seeks to influence what enters through entertainment, through conversation, through unseen atmosphere. The battle is subtle, and that is why God's response is precise. Salt in that place becomes a marker of remembrance. It says that the house has not forgotten the covenant, that the family understands that peace is guarded, not assumed, that protection is established, not improvised. In Scripture, forgetting always preceded collapse. Remembering always preceded restoration. This instruction is an act of remembering. Remembering that God still cares about houses. Remembering that he still gives practical commands. Remembering that obedience opens doors that prayer alone does not force open. The place God identifies is not chosen because it is dramatic, but because it is strategic. It is a place passed daily, often without thought, yet constantly used. That is how God works. He embeds his authority into the rhythms of life. Every time that place is crossed, the instruction stands. Every movement acknowledges it. It becomes part of the house's unseen structure. And over time, what is consistently honored becomes spiritually reinforced. There are moments in